Ethan Mercer sat at his workstation, the hum of servers and the soft click of keyboards forming a familiar backdrop to his day. The Nexus Complex, a cutting-edge facility known for pushing the boundaries of AI and machine learning, was both his sanctuary and his prison. Rows of monitors displayed lines of code, each segment representing the lifeblood of predictive algorithms that had made the company a leader in technological advancements. But today, something was different. There was a gnawing unease at the edge of his consciousness, a sense that the patterns he had become so accustomed to were subtly shifting. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the remnants of a strange dream that had plagued him the night before, a dream where the numbers on his screens morphed into symbols, ancient and ominous. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating before he resumed his work. It wasn't the first time he had experienced such dreams, but lately they had become more frequent, more vivid. And now, as he glanced at the screen, a particular string of code caught his eye. It was a small, almost imperceptible anomaly in the algorithm, an unexpected output that shouldn't have been there. Frowning, he leaned in closer, examining the code with the precision of a surgeon. The anomaly was minor, just a blip, but it was enough to unsettle him. He ran the program again, watching the data stream across the screen. The anomaly appeared once more, this time accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible feeling of déjà vu. It was as if he had seen this exact sequence of events before, not in a previous analysis, but in his dreams. Ethan shook his head, trying to clear the fog of uncertainty that clouded his mind. He was a man of logic, of science. Dreams were the mind's way of processing information, nothing more. Yet, the more he tried to dismiss the feeling, the stronger it became, like a shadow that refused to disappear no matter how much light was cast upon it. A colleague passed by, giving him a quick nod. "Everything all right, Ethan?" "Yeah, just a bit of a glitch," Ethan replied, his voice more casual than he felt. He didn't want to admit that a simple algorithm was unnerving him. After all, glitches were part of the job, especially when dealing with the cutting-edge technology that Nexus prided itself on. But as the colleague walked away, Ethan's gaze returned to the screen, the unease gnawing at him with renewed intensity. He opened the program's logs, searching for any indication of what might have caused the anomaly. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he navigated through the data, but nothing seemed out of place. It was as if the glitch had appeared out of nowhere, an uninvited guest in the pristine world of code he had meticulously crafted. For a moment, he considered bringing it up with Dr. Thorne, the enigmatic head of the Nexus Complex, but something held him back. Dr. Thorne was known for his brilliance, but also for his ruthlessness. Bringing up an unexplainable anomaly without a logical explanation could be seen as incompetence, a weakness. And in this world, weakness was not something Ethan could afford. Instead, he made a mental note to keep an eye on the anomaly, to see if it persisted or if it was just a one-time occurrence. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. It was a sign, a precursor to something larger, something that lurked just beneath the surface of his consciousness. As the hours passed, Ethan's focus wavered between his work and the lingering memory of the dream. The symbols, the sense of foreboding, all seemed to point to a connection he couldn't quite grasp. He had always been meticulous, methodical, but now doubt had crept into his mind, sowing seeds of uncertainty. By the time he finally forced himself to leave the office, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. The Nexus Complex, with its sleek modern architecture, stood as a monument to human achievement. But tonight, it felt more like a fortress, one that held secrets even its most brilliant minds couldn't decipher. Ethan drove home in silence, the usual comfort of the evening commute replaced by a sense of anticipation. He had no answers, only questions, and the feeling that something was about to change. The anomaly, the dream, the sense of déjà vu, they were all connected, threads in a web that was slowly beginning to reveal itself. Ethan sat at his small kitchen table, the remnants of a hastily prepared meal pushed aside. His apartment, sparse and utilitarian, was a reflection of his methodical nature, a place where everything had its place and disorder was unwelcome. Yet tonight, a sense of disquiet hung in the air, a feeling that his controlled environment could not dispel. The apartment's dim lighting cast long shadows on the walls, the quiet hum of the city outside providing a backdrop to his thoughts. He stared at the object on the table, a small, leather-bound journal worn with age. It was his mother's, discovered in the back of a forgotten drawer during his last visit to her house, which now stood empty, a relic of a past he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Ethan had always known his mother to be a private, almost secretive woman. She had been a constant, albeit distant, presence in his life. Her sharp intellect and stern demeanor a defining force in his upbringing. But their relationship had been marked by a strange detachment, a lack of warmth that Ethan had never quite understood. Now, as he opened the journal, the faint scent of old paper and ink filled the room, a scent that carried him back to his childhood. He could almost see her, sitting in the study, writing late into the night as he watched from the shadows of the hallway, too young to understand what she was working on, yet old enough to sense the importance of her task. The journal's pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting, his mother's unmistakable script. But as he began to read, Ethan felt a growing unease. The entries were cryptic, filled with references to rituals, symbols, and a language he couldn't decipher. There were mentions of an ancient entity, of dreams that seemed more real than reality, and of a society that operated in the shadows, manipulating events in ways that defied logic. Ethan's breath caught as he read a passage that described a ritual, one that involved a child who, the journal suggested, was him. His mother had been involved in something dark, something far beyond the realm of science and reason. The words on the page blurred as a memory, long buried, surfaced in his mind. A memory of a night when he had awoken to find his mother standing over him, her eyes distant, her lips moving in a silent prayer. The memory had been too strange, too unsettling for his young mind to process. He had buried it deep, chalking it up to a dream, but now, with the journal in front of him, the pieces began to fall into place. His mother hadn't just been a brilliant, albeit distant, scientist. She had been part of something far more sinister. Ethan's hands shook as he turned the pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. The symbols, the rituals, the talk of ancient entities, it was all too much. He wanted to close the journal, to walk away from the darkness that threatened to engulf him, but he couldn't. He was drawn to it, compelled to understand the truth of who his mother was, and what role she had played in the life he had so meticulously built. The final pages of the journal were written in a different hand, the script jagged, as if the writer had been in a hurry. They described a ritual that had gone wrong, a possession that had taken hold of his mother, and a warning, one that was meant for him. "They are watching you, Ethan. They always have been." The words echoed in his mind, a chilling confirmation of what he had begun to suspect. His life, his career, his dreams, none of it had been by chance. It had all been orchestrated, manipulated by forces he couldn't begin to comprehend. Ethan slammed the journal shut, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a wave of nausea, the world spinning around him. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about his mother, had been a lie. The truth was far darker, far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. He sat in the darkness, the journal still clutched in his hands, as the weight of his discovery settled over him. He had uncovered a legacy of darkness, one that had been passed down to him without his knowledge, and now there was no turning back. Ethan couldn't sleep. The city's quiet hum was usually a comfort, a reminder of the steady, predictable world outside, but tonight it felt oppressive, like a pulse in the darkness. The journal sat on the table, closed but not forgotten, its secrets lingering in the corners of his mind. He had tried to push it out of his thoughts, to focus on the cold logic of his work, but his mother's words, those cryptic entries, gnawed at him like a persistent itch. The screens in his small office flickered as he ran through lines of code, his fingers moving on autopilot. This was his sanctuary, the one place where everything made sense. Code was clean, logical, an extension of his mind where every problem had a solution if you just looked hard enough. But tonight, the code on his screen seemed different, almost alive. He blinked, trying to clear his thoughts, but the sensation remained. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, or the unsettling revelations from his mother's journal, but something about his work felt off. He had been refining an algorithm for weeks, an experimental project meant to predict market trends with uncanny accuracy. But now, as he stared at the cascading data, he realized it was more than just market trends the algorithm was predicting. The patterns emerging were eerily familiar, mirroring the dreams that had haunted him for months. Dreams of places he'd never been, people he'd never met, yet felt intimately connected to. At first, he had dismissed them as the byproducts of stress, the subconscious mind playing tricks. but the patterns in his code suggested something far more disturbing. Ethan's hands hovered over the keyboard, a sudden chill washing over him. He had always prided himself on his rationality, his ability to stay grounded in the face of the unknown, but now he was faced with something that defied logic. The algorithms he had created were somehow tapping into his subconscious, predicting events that hadn't yet happened but felt inevitable. He began to cross-reference the data with his journal entries, matching the cryptic symbols with the patterns in his code. The connections were undeniable, the shapes and sequences aligning in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The dreams, the algorithm, his mother's journal, it was all connected, tied together by threads he couldn't yet see but felt tightening around him. As the night wore on, Ethan's exhaustion gave way to a feverish energy, his mind racing as he tried to piece together the puzzle. He was on the brink of something huge and terrifying. The algorithm wasn't just predicting the future, it was shaping it, pulling strings behind the scenes, and he was somehow at the center of it all. His thoughts flashed back to his mother's journal, to the warnings she had written in those last frantic pages. She had known this day would come, had tried to prepare him in her own cryptic way. But why? What had she been a part of? And more importantly, what role was he meant to play in this unfolding nightmare? Ethan's pulse quickened as he scanned the code one last time, his eyes catching on a string of data that shouldn't have been there, an anomaly, something injected into the system that he hadn't programmed. His heart pounded as he traced it back, following the digital breadcrumbs to their source. It led him to an encrypted file buried deep within the system, a file he had never seen before. With shaking hands, Ethan decrypted the file, the screen filling with symbols identical to those in his mother's journal. His breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him. This wasn't just code, it was a message, a directive from something beyond his understanding, using his own work against him. Suddenly, the lines between dream and reality blurred, the algorithm's predictions weaving into the fabric of his life. The dreams, the patterns, the ancient symbols, they were all part of the same design, a design that had been guiding him all along. But toward what end, and who or what was behind it? As the first rays of dawn filtered through the window, Ethan sat in stunned silence, the enormity of his discovery crashing down on him. The code was alive, a living thing that pulsed with a dark intelligence, and it had chosen him. What that meant, he didn't know, but he was certain of one thing. His life, his very existence, had been commandeered by forces he couldn't begin to comprehend. And whatever was coming, it was already in motion, with him at the center. The sun crept higher over the city, its light cutting through the lingering darkness in Ethan's apartment. But inside, the atmosphere remained tense and shadowed. Ethan hadn't moved from his chair, his eyes locked on the screen where the decrypted file now lay open. The symbols danced across his vision, the same ancient runes that had filled his mother's journal, now encoded into the digital matrix of his own creation. A sense of dread settled over him, a cold realization that whatever he was dealing with, it was far beyond anything he had encountered in his work before. This wasn't just a rogue algorithm or a glitch in the system. It was something ancient, something that had been waiting for him to find it. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all. How could his work, something so rooted in logic and technology, intersect with the arcane? He had always been a man of science, relying on data and evidence, but now he was being confronted with the supernatural, the inexplicable. His mother's cryptic warnings, the predictive dreams, the eerie accuracy of the algorithms, it was all connected, and the pieces were starting to fall into place. But with understanding came fear. The implications were staggering. If the algorithm was somehow linked to the occult, then what did that mean for his work? And what was his role in this unfolding nightmare? Ethan pushed back from the desk, pacing the room as he tried to process the information. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the symbols on the screen were more than just abstract patterns. They were alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy that seemed to reach out from the screen, wrapping around him like tendrils. His thoughts drifted back to his childhood, to the strange occurrences that had always seemed to follow him, dreams that became reality, events that seemed to align with uncanny precision. He had always brushed them off as coincidence, the workings of an overactive mind, but now he wasn't so sure. His mother had known about them, had tried to shield him in her own way, but she had also been a part of it. The journal was proof of that. She had been involved in something dark, something ancient, And now it had come for him. Ethan stopped pacing, his gaze returning to the screen. He had to know more. If he was going to understand what was happening, he needed to dig deeper, to uncover the truth buried within the code. But where to start? The symbols were a language he didn't understand, a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. He thought about reaching out to someone, maybe an expert in ancient languages or the occult, but something told him that would only draw more attention to himself, attention he didn't want. Then he remembered the dreams, the precognitive visions that had plagued him for months. They had always seemed random, disconnected flashes of the future, but now he wondered if they were more than that. Maybe they were trying to tell him something, to guide him toward the answers he sought. But how could he trust them? How could he be sure that they weren't just another manipulation, another trap set by the forces that had been watching him all along? Ethan sat back down, his hands hovering over the keyboard. He knew he had to proceed carefully, to unravel the mystery without alerting whatever was behind it. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed help, and not just from any expert. He needed someone who understood both the scientific and the supernatural, someone who could bridge the gap between the two worlds. But who? A name surfaced in his mind, someone he hadn't spoken to in years, Dr. Sophia Raines, a brilliant yet eccentric academic who had once been his mentor. She had dabbled in the fringes of science, exploring the connections between quantum physics and metaphysical phenomena. Most of the scientific community had dismissed her as a crackpot, but Ethan had always admired her unconventional thinking, her willingness to explore the unknown. He hesitated, knowing that contacting her would open a door he might not be able to close. But what choice did he have? The symbols, the algorithms, his mother's journal? It was all converging, and he needed answers. With a deep breath, Ethan opened a secure communication channel and typed out a message, explaining as much as he dared. He hit send, knowing that there was no turning back. As he waited for a response, a sense of unease settled over him. He was no longer in control, no longer the master of his own destiny. The algorithm, the ancient society, the dark forces that had been shaping his life from the shadows, they were all pulling him towards something inevitable, and he was powerless to stop it. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the room, but the light brought no comfort. The lines between reality and nightmare were blurring, and Ethan knew that the path ahead would only get darker. He was caught in the web, and the more he struggled, the tighter it became.